Now to the Middle East, where negotiators in Qatar are resuming talks amid hopes that a ceasefire deal in Gaza is within reach. The agreement would include the gradual release of Israeli hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. All sides have indicated that an agreement is closer than ever, with both Israel and Hamas openly expressing that a deal can be reached. Well, here's what we know about what is potentially likely to be included in this agreement. It will start with the initial release of 34 Israeli hostages, including women, children, the wounded and the sick. In return, it's expected that Israel will release 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, including approximately 190 who've been serving sentences of 15 years or more. And an agreement would need to be reached on the future of Gaza, including whether Israeli troops can remain there. Well, the agreement would allow Israel to maintain an 800-metre buffer zone along its eastern and northern borders with Gaza, at least during the first phase of this deal. It also includes provisions for Israeli forces to remain in the Philadelphia corridor. That's that strip of land separating Gaza from Egypt. So a lot to discuss. Let's cross over to Jerusalem, where my colleague John Donnison joins us live now. And John, we're hearing Palestinians and Israelis expressing cautious optimism. Where are we with this potential deal?
Well, it's a bit of deja vu today after yesterday, because we're basically in a bit of a holding pattern. It does seem that this deal is almost done, but not quite. So what mediators are saying is that Hamas and Israel are still wrangling a bit over what they're calling the technical details of this deal. So they've agreed, it seems, the broad principles, and they're just finalising how exactly it's going to be carried out. Now, as you say, the first phase of this deal, which will last 6 weeks. During that period, we'll see just over 30 Israeli hostages released, including 3 apparently on the very first day of the deal, in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners to be freed from Israeli jails. Now, it's at the second phase where things get a bit difficult, because then Israel is saying that after 6 weeks, it wants to retain the right to resume the war if it feels it's necessary. Now, Hamas, although massively diminished in Gaza, it's still there. They are still fighting back. We've had Israeli soldiers killed this week. So what happens then in that next phase? And, you know, Hamas, the question is, if it's not Hamas that governs Gaza, then who's going to do it? And that is very much, it has to be said, an unanswered question at the moment.
John, an unanswered question, a lot of unanswered questions, because arguably we've been here before, as you say, deja vu from yesterday, but we've been close to agreements before. How does this particular one, is it possible to say yet how this one differs to what we saw earlier this year?
It doesn't differ very much, to be honest. The deal is basically the same one that was put in front of the Israeli cabinet back in May, and we had the hardline right-wing interior minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, saying yesterday that basically he had succeeded in blocking that deal over the past few months. Now, what's changed is that we've got Donald Trump due in the White House from next week, and he has said he wants a deal done before he takes office. So it does seem to be that pressure that has led to the deal almost being done. I think people in Gaza, here in Israel, the families of those hostages waiting for them to be news that they could be freed, the hundreds of thousands who've been suffering in Gaza for months, they are going to be waiting for this deal to be done. It will be greeted with joy and celebration, I think, if it is done, but it's not there yet.
John, always good to get your perspective there from Jerusalem. John Donnison, thank you so much. Well, a lot to discuss. We can pick up on some of those points that John was making there with Alan Pincus, who's a former Israeli diplomat and a columnist for the newspaper Haaretz. Welcome, sir. Just when it comes to what we are seeing with this deal, our colleague there in Jerusalem was saying that the differences between this deal and what was on the table earlier on this year, that there aren't that many differences. So is the difference here that in a few days' time, Donald Trump will be inaugurated?
That's exactly right, Kasia. That is the game changer, if you will, or the one dimension that has changed, because this deal was offered in March, discussed again in May, again in July, and there was a one last-ditch effort in August. And neither side agreed to, each for its own political reasons, neither side agreed to conclude the deal. So the only thing that changed is the fact that Mr. Trump is going into the White House on the 20th of January. That put enormous pressure on Netanyahu, who would love and would rather continue the war indefinitely. This is what he's essentially been doing for the last 8 months. So there was no reason for him not to do so. And your colleague, if I may add one more thing, your colleague was absolutely right on the money when he said that Israel insists on resuming the fighting if necessary, quote unquote, after the end of the process, i.e., after the conclusion of the 42 days.
So nobody wins then. Obviously, nobody wins at the best of times, given just what we are seeing on the ground in Gaza and the fact that the hostages are still being kept. But when it comes to what Israel wanted, the elimination of Hamas, and when it arguably comes to what Hamas wanted, the withdrawal of the Israeli forces from Gaza, none of that will potentially happen if this deal does go ahead, as people are cautiously optimistic about.
Well, you're absolutely right, Kasha. The one thing that's going to change, and the one thing that's going to make a lot of people happy, is the fact that the Israeli hostages will be released, and at the same time, the Palestinians will be happy that prisoners have been released from Israeli jails, although that doesn't change the devastation and decimation of Gaza itself. That requires a humongous, monumental reconstruction effort. But what you're asking, Kasha, essentially goes to the heart of what defines victory. And for Israel, victory meant, and those were empty cliches as it turned out to be, the eradication of Hamas, the annihilation of Hamas, the elimination of Hamas, and a total victory. All four of those were used profusely by Prime Minister Netanyahu. That hasn't been achieved. Hamas was degraded significantly militarily, but it's still there, which leads us to how Hamas defines a victory. And if there's one man standing waving a Hamas flag, they can claim that they sort of won. They brought devastation. They self-inflicted complete destruction on Gaza, but they can claim that they won, that they had won. And now we go back to square one, which is how you presented it. No one wins.